Well, you like my dog so much. I'm like, okay, here she is waiting. She's waiting for me to start this. Oh, she's leaving now. She's pissed. She don't want me to start the broadcast without her. I don't know. You're a diva. But anyway, I'll get back on this here. Um, all right. Well, welcome back to 42nd Street Pete's Big Dumb Fun Show. And being that we're in February, it is Black History Month. And I would be remiss that if I didn't start speaking about some of our great black actors that appeared in Grindhouse films and other movies altogether. And I'm going to bring up Mantan Moreland again because he seems to be the bane of the culture, cancel culture crew there, which I can't stand. But, I grew up, in the 50s and 60s, and television was just in its infancy then. And just like a lot of people have done with VHS and DVDs and now streaming, that's their kid's babysitter. My parents would just plop us in front of the TV and they didn't really seem to give a shit what we watched. So I watched all the Mantan Moreland zombie movies and the Charlie Chan movies. And Mantan was always second or third billed, mostly third billed, but he was up there. And I never saw race with him. I saw just an interesting character who was actually fucking funny and elevated those creepy, low budget zombie films into something that made them actually more fun. And, his acting was just an extension of his nightclub act. And just the fact that these idiots come down on him for that, he was a working actor back then. And I remember that Sid Haig told me that this guy was just so thrilled to be back working again with Spider Baby. And that was basically his last appearance. So, like I said, I grew up with this guy. It was never any color line with me at all. And the same goes for Woody Strode. And I know I have already done an episode on him, but I can elaborate further because, again, he was another guy that I sort of watched growing up. And, his roles, first off, Woody was a football player. He was one of the first four black athletes that integrated professional football back in, I think it was, I made a note here or something. When the hell was that? 46. So he played pro ball, then he got into professional wrestling as a babyface. And he was really close friends with Gorgeous George. And but he quit wrestling because he was doing better acting. But like I said, I saw him as I was growing up, and I saw him in Pork Chop Hill, where he was a coward. I saw him as John Wayne's guy in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. And I saw him as a slave in Genghis Khan, which is another brutal film. And he was in a lot of, he was in Jungle Jim, and it was like a typecast thing. He was cast as a native. He was a gladiator in Spartacus and Fort Kirk Douglas. So he's basically sort of stereotyping roles up until a certain point. And that, I think the certain point was when he was cast in The Professionals, along with Burt Lancaster, Lee Marvin, Robert Ryan, Jack Palance. He was one of the four that was sent down to Mexico to rescue a woman, Claudia Cardinelli. Well, him and Lee Marvin became friends on the set, and Lee was the one who convinced him to not wear a shirt, just wear the vest, because Woody had a great physique, and basically the cameras were on that physique, and that's what you saw. And Burt Lancaster was an athlete too. He was an acrobat at one point, and he kept challenging Woody to feats of strength, and he would lose and get despondent over it. There was a lot of backstory on that thing, something about them shooting this cowboy from their hotel room with an arrow, and then Lee Marvin, they hid the bow and arrow in Lee Marvin's room. He took credit for shooting at the cowboy and blew it up. But that was sort of the start of him getting better roles, and what happened was Sergio Leone was making Once Upon a Time in the West. And he wanted the three gunmen that met Charles Bronson at the train station to be Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef, and Eli Wallach, sort of symbolizing the passing of the Old West into the New. Well, two guys were down for it, but Clint wasn't. So he got Jack Elam, Al Mullock, and Woody Strode. And Woody Strode, I believe, was paid $10K to go over to Italy and do that one scene, but then that opened the door big time for him, because he was embraced by the Italian filmmakers and did a bunch of spaghetti westerns. Boot Hill was one. He did a bunch of other stuff with ensemble cast, like he was in The Revengers with Ernest Borgnine and William Holden. He was in The Deserter with Slim Pickens, Ricardo Montalban, Chuck Connors, Ian Bannon, Pat Wayne, and a whole bunch of other people. So he just took off. And here's where Quentin Tarantino, if you can see that, I'll put it up close, that's where Quentin Tarantino got his idea for Pulp Fiction with the two hitmen, the black guy and the white guy. And if you can see it on the back, there he is with Henry Silva. And it's basically, he was a star. Mario Orndorff, Woody Strode, Henry Silva, and Aldo Simone. So he was getting, billed as he should have been, as a star. And he kept on working right up until, I believe, his 80s. He was in Posse and a couple other things before he passed away. But interestingly enough, and I'll segue into the other guy, when Sam Peckinpah was casting for Major Dundee, Woody was in the running, but Sam didn't want him because he said he looked like a half-breed. Well, Woody is part Indian, so that makes sense. But instead of hiring Woody, he hired Brock Peters instead. And Brock was Tom Robinson in To Kill a Mockingbird back in 1962. And he was cast in Major Dundee as Sergeant Aesop. And there was a real interesting scene between him and John Davis Chandler, who played this, ignorant redneck, Southern Peckerwood, where they're settling down for the first night out, and the Chandler character yells over, "Hey, you forgot your manners, boy. Take off my boots." And of course, there was a couple N-words dropped in there, and Sergeant Aesop really didn't know how to handle it until the preacher, played by Robert R.G. Armstrong, went in and basically ripped the boots off and threw them around. And then there was a tense scene, and then the commander of the Confederates, who was played by Richard Harris, went up and complimented Sergeant Aesop on the way him and his soldiers had handled the river crossing. So he was in a bunch of stuff. He too went to Italy for Ace High with Eli Wallach. He was in the McMasters, Soylent Green, Slaughter's Big Ripoff, Framed, and was a fixture on a lot of TV shows, and was in a couple Star Trek movies, the last two. But unfortunately, he passed away, I believe, in 2005 of pancreatic cancer. So, there's a lot of guys that did a lot of work and did a lot of great stuff. And those are the guys I'd like to focus on. And I'll do a few more segments this month to honor those who, were involved in the Grindhouse. And some are pretty much have been overlooked by people, but not here. We're not going to overlook anybody. So until our next episode, thanks for subscribing, welcoming all the new subscribers to this madness. Stay safe, and we'll catch you on the flip side.